Sales conversations where both buyers and sellers win are rare and plagued by the cringe. We've all felt it. It's that sinking feeling that both buyer and seller get when the conversation is going off the rails. My name is Adam Clay. I'm the CEO of Rainmakers. I've spent 25 years building and leading global sales organizations and thinking about the sales conversation. At the Cringe, we put the sales conversation under the microscope and explore pathways to ensuring that sales reps, leaders, and managers conduct great sales conversations. So today, my guest is William Baer, Chief Operating Officer of Baker Communications. William, welcome to the Cringe.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Oh, we're delighted to have you. So let's start by having you tell us a little bit about you and what you do at Baker Communications.
I sell, and I run a sales organization. I've been in sales probably since before I knew what sales was. I used to, as a kid, probably sell my parents against each other. Like, hey, Mom, Dad said if it's cool with you, I could go spend the night. And then they would fight it out later on because none of them knew what was going on. Through that, I think I developed a little bit of what I would call career ADD. I love to learn. So anytime somebody would come to me with this idea of, hey, I've got this thing, would you be interested in having a conversation? I was always interested in having a conversation. I ended up at Baker Communications because I've had a longstanding relationship with the CEO. And at one point in time, a mutual friend of ours said, you should really talk to Walter about all these various things that you've done because there might be a fit for you there. So I was brought into Baker, 15, 17 years ago, something like that, to run a new portion of the business. It was around revenue generation consulting, how to bring sales, marketing, and operations together to create revenue for organizations. And then through that, every time Walter asked me a question about, hey, do you think you could? My answer was always, I can give it a try. And so I just moved into different roles in the company up until the point that I was made Chief Operating Officer for Baker. Now, that still means that I run the data side of the organization. I'm on calls. I was on a customer call just a moment ago because at the end of the day, I'm just an old sales dog. I've sold everything from knives door to door to financial planning to learning and development to revenue generation methodology to, everything and anything in between.
All right. And for the audience members who are not as familiar with what Baker Communications does as, for example, I am, can you give us a 30-second commercial on what the firm does? And then I want to talk a little bit about some of the things in your background.
Yeah, so Baker Communications is a 44-year-old performance improvement company. So I would say we focus on people, process, and technology and how to integrate those together to drive the greatest results for organizations.
I appreciate that. But to put a slightly finer point on it and connect the dots on why I thought you'd be a fantastic guest on the Cringe, you guys do a lot of work in the area of sales methodology, right? All the way down to the point of conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Everything that salespeople do is related to the conversations that we have with customers. So from a perspective of curriculum, again, we've got, 40 years of curriculum that's all based around how do you engage in a conversation with your customers that is focused on what are the outcomes that are important to them. Even in this conversation that we're having today, the biggest issue that we see is that oftentimes salespeople are rushed and they're listening for what they can sell rather than truly listening for the outcomes a customer is looking to get. And if you can just transition that part of your brain to what's in it for me, to why am I here for them, then you will have more success. I use the example frequently. People are like, well, why should we do this, and why should we have this much discovery, and why should we ask all these questions? And I'm like, have you ever had to be convinced to buy something you need? And the answer is no. When somebody needs something and wants something, they buy it, right? It's something that they don't perceive as a need to have. They see it as a nice to have, where they go, I want to think about it. I need a bargain. I need a deal, right? But if I can find out what it is that you need to be successful in your own right, I don't have to convince you to buy it. I just need to show you where it is.
That's very well said. And I think we can circle back on that point here in a few moments. I want to ask you, because you talked about some things that you did in and around sales prior to getting to Baker Communications. What in your early career history led you to believe that the sales industry, working in and around it, was the place that you wanted to be? I'm quietly hoping it's got something to do with selling knives door to door, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, it's so that is an interesting question. I mean, if I go way back, in the Wayback Machine, I was one of those people in school that I played sports, but I also played in the band, and so there was always fundraisers. So we were always selling stuff, right? Candles or candy bars or whatever it is. Post that education period of my life, the first real sales thing that I got into was selling Cutco knives door to door, right? And if you've ever sold anything door to door, you know how hard that is. I mean, it's not only is there the, why is somebody knocking on my door, but it's like, now why are you also trying to sell me something? How can I in 30 seconds get your attention? And at the time, the way we used to do it with Cutco knives was we used to cut the edge off of a penny with scissors. And I liked that challenge of what can I say or do to get somebody to give me enough time to see if what I'm doing is relevant. Now, door-to-door sales that is a really challenging thing, because you show up at somebody's house and you've got to convince them in 30 seconds that what you have is what they need. They didn't come looking to you. There's always some aspect of sales in anything that you do. Friends, when you're trying to decide, what are we doing tonight? You're pitching, right? Hey, let's go do this. Why should we do that over that? But I would say, years later, I moved to Washington State and I was considering going back to school again. And I had interviewed for a number of different positions, but I'd never been in car sales. And so I actually interviewed to be a car salesman. They offered me the job. It had what was told to me a somewhat flexible schedule, which I was sold that. And I can tell you that's not true. If you want to make money in car sales, you're on the B schedule, which is be there all day, all night, because that's where your customers are. And so I started selling cars, and I think that's probably where I learned this idea of, if I can find in a limited time what somebody is looking for and get them connected to that thing by showing it to them, then I can sell them exactly what it is that they want. And it's exactly what I want to do is convince them that I have something they need.
In the context of selling cars, what did that mean exactly?
I learned from a guy who later came onto the team that he had the most disarming way of convincing people to share what it is that they wanted. And he would say, he's like, so Adam, welcome to Kirkland Nissan Subaru. My name is William Bear. For the next 45 minutes, I'm going to spend quality time with you trying to understand what brought you here today and showing you anything you want to see. But at minute 46, I'm going to sell you a car. You ready? And people would just start talking to him. Well, hey, I'm looking for a car, looking for a truck, 2-door, 4-door, this, that, the other. And he would, 45 minutes. He's like, okay, let's go. And it was really about setting people at ease and letting them know, I am going to help you uncover what it is that you're looking for today. And then I'm going to sell it to you.
One thing I love about talking to people who are passionate about sales and who have these diverse life experiences. You see, I've known you for a little while, William. I didn't know that you sold knives door to door, worked at Kirkland Subaru, if I have that right. And so I have to ask, so that rep who sort of put that upfront contract together sounds very compelling, but the end of it, was, and then I'm going to sell you a car. So we have plenty of people who listen to the Cringe who would say, well, wouldn't it also be good to say, or I might not sell you a car if I don't have something for you. But I have to ask, like I've never worked at a dealership. I don't know if what works in enterprise sales or software sales has any merit whatsoever. But why not say that at a dealership? I'm just super curious.
If you show up to a car dealership, Adam, the person that you meet that calls themselves a salesperson, what are they going to try to do?
Sell me a car.
You know this, right?
I know that.
You know that. And they're going to try to sell you something that they have because that's their job. They're not representing everything. They're representing a finite number of things that they can sell you. And it's a car. The perspective is, if you're at their dealership, there must be a car that brought you there of some kind. And they are a salesperson. So isn't it authentic to say, I'm going to try to sell you something? Because that's that's why you're here and you're talking to me, but I'm going to give you this time. I'm going to give you 45 minutes. Now, could you have said, and at the end of 45 minutes, maybe I won't try to sell you something? But in car sales, would that be wrong? Yeah, it would be wrong.
That's why
it would be wrong.
I asked.
Because they're never going to not try to sell you something at a car dealership. I mean, heck, people bring their cars in for service and they try to sell you a new car. That's just the game.
I'm learning something, or at least coming to understand something that I never really got, because I've always thought, again, I've never sold cars at a dealership, but I'm fascinated by it because it's a common type of transaction that so many people have. I always thought it would be so disarming as a buyer if a sales rep turned to me and said, hey, and today I'm going to sell you a car, but at the end of the day, I might not, because maybe I can't meet your needs with my product. You're saying in that business, I'm already on the lot, I'm inside the dealership. That might work in software sales or manufacturing sales where you're genuinely uncertain if you have something for somebody. That's an honest statement. But in car sales, you're saying you're really going to work against your own interests doing that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm a firm believer in the idea of being authentic in all things, right? And especially in the way that you sell. And so I think it would just be wrong to say, I'm not going to try to sell you anything. Because, for example, if you just take marquees, right? So I worked at a Nissan and Subaru dealership. And so our major competition, if somebody was there for a Nissan, was a Toyota or a Honda. Okay, at the end of the day, what is really the difference, right? They have 4 wheels, they have 4 doors, they have leather interior, they probably have very similar feature sets. It comes down to which one do you decide you want, right? And if you were already leaning towards one of them, you probably would have been there.
Yeah.
But you're here.
Yeah.
So if I can convince you that I have the one that you want by understanding what are you looking for and does it meet your needs, and that's where I think, can I get you emotionally invested in this car? Now, if you get to that minute 46, you've already found something that they've liked, right? You found something, you've moved them through the sales process, you've demoed it with them, you've gotten them excited about it. Now it's just a matter of sitting down and working out the financial picture.
Yeah, the numbers.
Right? And if the numbers work out, they're going to buy it. So never do you have to go, okay, now because if you don't get to 45 minutes, chances are you didn't find something that they wanted. They're leaving.
Yeah.
So,
I love
it's
that.
interesting, right? We could go back and get a job in car sales and see what that would change if you said, or maybe I won't sell you something.
I've always wondered, but I guess there's probably a reason I'm not in car sales. I doubt that I would be very good at it. But we've never had somebody on the Cringe that had experience in that area, so I couldn't resist temptation. I had to go down that lane. I love it. So All right, let's shift gears. It's time for me to ask one of the hallmark questions that we have here on the show, and that is, given your breadth of experience and all the work that you did before Baker, leading up to Baker, and the many conversations you've been a part of or at least observed, William, what in a sales conversation, experienced or observed, makes you cringe?
The things that make me cringe the most in conversations today are the things that are not said, not the things that are said. When I listen to sales conversations, they have a tendency to be rushed. They're listening for an opportunity to pitch rather than for an opportunity to truly understand.
Why do you suppose salespeople feel the need to rush to talk about themselves? And of course, I want to understand a bit more about what grates on you about this. But what do you think the root of it is? You've been around thousands of sales conversations, my guess is, and you've got some insight here. What's going on?
There's a couple things, right? And you have to look at each of the conversations probably a little bit in isolation. But I would say the primary one is that sales comes with a lot of pressure to achieve your quota, to achieve your targets. And so that pressure that's put on people sometimes forces them to be very fixated on where in the conversation will somebody mention something that I can connect a value that I bring to them so that I can then get to a demo or ask them if they want to buy something that I have. That's a part of it. And then I think from an environment perspective, so many organizations are focused on results, but results are inherently past tense. Right? And so we're always asking about results and numbers, but we're never really trying to understand how we got the results and numbers. I was out on a speaking engagement, I think 2 years ago, and we were focused on this idea of sales and salesmanship and what happens. And, one of the issues that I see happening in organizations today that's fairly pervasive is you have a great salesperson. I mean, they were born to be in sales, right? It is very instinctive for them. And so what happens to that person? They do a great job and then they're promoted to a manager. But the challenge is, as a manager, is that they don't have the empathy for the struggle for those people that aren't as good at it. So that's the second challenge that I see, is that you have managers that are just saying, hey, listen, you just pick up the phone and you do this and you say this and you have a deal and the deal closes and it's done, because they don't understand that what was simple for them is very difficult for the people that they're now managing. And so they're applying additional pressure to that person, telling them it's easy, you just do it. But they can't actually teach it because it's so instinctual for them. And the pressure they're putting to perform on that individual causes them to look for, how quickly can I get to a yes?
I see. So just to play that back, because that's a really good answer, but nuanced. So I think you said two things. I just want to make sure I'm keeping up. The first is conversations often get rushed. They get reduced to the lowest common denominator because that's what salespeople think they have to look for. Did the prospect say something that leads me to believe that I can bring value in the form of a solution or value in the form of a demo? And that's in no small part owing to just pressure to perform. The second thing you said, which I thought was a really interesting insight, is that not infrequently, sales managers themselves were top salespeople. Perhaps they had a very solid instinctive grasp about how to talk to buyers, tough to translate in coaching conversations, and tough to help people replicate if so much of it has to do with who I am as an individual as opposed to exactly what I might do in terms of process. And so you're saying those two variables create an environment where salespeople rush through conversations, often leaving a lot undiscovered. Do I have that right?
You do. And I think I would say that there is one additional material item to mention that impacts both of those areas. and that is fear. And that fear can live in a couple different places. For the salesperson, I think there's a fear of, what if I ask a question that I don't know the answer to? Or what if I ask a question that the person is then insulted that I asked them, right? And then for the managers, it's, well, what if they don't make this sale and then I look bad as a leader, right? And, what if I don't hit my number? Or what, so I think there's a lot of fear around a failure to perform, and that oftentimes inhibits the learning.
What I thought you were going to say was just fear of asking the difficult question because it might reveal that the buyer isn't interested, or the buyer is not the right prospect for you, which I've often thought is at the root of why questions don't get asked and therefore things aren't discovered in a conversation. You're suggesting a different type of fear.
Yeah, well, I think both of those fears are relevant. Depending on the salesperson, some salespeople would rather have bad business in their pipeline by not asking those difficult questions about, is this even aligned to what you're looking for, or are you even a person that can say yes? But oftentimes, I think it's even before that, when there's a fear of asking questions because there's we're talking about relationship, right, and being authentic. There's, what happens if you ask a question that you don't know the answer to? And this is a very specific conversation that I've had with a lot of salespeople. I don't want to ask that question because I don't know the answer to it. I'm just learning. I'm still learning. And I think that's a great question to ask, because it allows you to have an answer ready that shows the ability for you to collaborate together, and it puts you on the same side of the table. And that is, oftentimes if you ask a question and the prospect, the person that you're talking to says, gosh, that's a great question. I don't know the answer. What do you think it is? You can go, listen, I don't know it either. It's just the question that popped into my head. Let's figure that out together. And now you're working together towards a common goal. That's why I cringe at the questions not asked, is because I think sometimes the motivators for not asking them are exactly the reasons you need to ask them. Like, I'll ask you a question, Adam. When was the last time you sat down to have a difficult conversation with one of your kids or your spouse or a really good friend that you had to think about the next question that you were going to ask?
Often.
Okay. Did the question pop into your head and then you were thinking about, how do I need to phrase this? Or was it that you literally had to think about, what question should I ask next in conversation?
Well, I think it was the latter. New information gets revealed, from, in this case, one of my kids. A lot of these conversations, I've never had them before. I have no idea what the answer is going to be, but I do feel like I authentically have to get to the bottom of something here. So, yeah.
So the questions start to pop into your head and you're deciding, which one of these questions do I ask and how exactly do I want to phrase it? It's because you're listening to what's being said and you're going, whoa, what do I do with this? That's the way a sales conversation should be as well. You should be able to just ask a question, listen to what comes back, take what pops into your head, think about, I wasn't expecting that, but how would I ask that? And I think oftentimes when you debrief a sales conversation with a sales rep, they can tell you those questions that they thought they should ask, but for some reason they didn't.
You're right about that. I think you said something there too. I just want to maybe cast a light on this for a moment. You said, well, I didn't want to ask a question I didn't know the answer to. I've heard that before. There's that old trope in sales, which sounds like you don't agree with for a moment. I certainly don't, but it's been out there. Never ask a customer a question you don't know the answer to.
Yeah, I don't agree.
I don't agree with that. I mean, that assumes that you know everything there is to know, or everything that's relevant about your customer's situation. And I think the whole point is that the likelihood that you do is zero, so you better discover it. with an authentic and urgent curiosity. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think the assumption that you could possibly know, even in like conversations, exactly what's causing it for this other person is false. Let's say that you have a friend and their parent passed away recently, and you had a parent that passed away too, and you go to this person and you're like, gosh, I'm really sorry to hear that. I know exactly how you feel. Everybody thinks, oh yeah, I could say that. I know exactly, if my parent died and their parent died, I would know exactly how they would feel. Well, what if their parent was horrible to them, right? What if they were actually like, you have no idea how I feel. They were horrible to me, right? They were a horrible person. You could be in a similar situation with a different person, and it could be a completely different conversation because you don't know. Right. And so anything you do would be assuming, but you can say, listen, I don't know the answer for you, but let's figure it out together.
Certainly a unique way of explaining the point, but I think what you did there was just take an experience that most people are going to go through at one point or another and assume that the person they're talking to has gone through that experience in precisely the same way, which is on one hand, human nature. On the other hand, it's wildly assumptive for all the reasons that you mentioned.
And that's what salespeople today are doing. They're going, okay, I sell a piece of technology, a middleware, or a platform or something to this industry and this vertical, and they're all the same, and they have the same buying cycles, and everything's the same. So I'm going to find that one thing that they answer, and I'm going to assume everything afterwards is identical. You're not really finding a compelling reason for that person, which could be different. Because as people, we're all different. The things we care about are different. Our motivations are different. And so it's important to always keep that in mind when you're selling anything, is even though I might be selling the same thing to a similar organization, the motivations for that organization, the needs behind it, how their users are going to engage with it are all going to be unique to that organization. So I should make sure I ask enough questions to really understand what are their compelling reasons.
I'm grateful that we're having this conversation because it's not one that we've had in prior episodes. But what you've said is experienced in a couple of ways. I want to run one by you. I've often marveled at how new salespeople, either new to the field or new to the company, can accomplish so much so quickly, often in ways that experienced salespeople who might have been at the organization for a long time don't. It's the journeyman phenomenon. Because new salespeople, new to the company or new in their career, they don't know enough about the product or the customer situation to do anything but ask questions. But 2 or 3 years later, they'll have seen many derivations of the customer's problem, many instances of the customer problem, and what they just start doing in the interest of time and efficiency, because I think everybody is being helped, is they sort of stop asking those questions that they asked when they were new, and they just start telling the customer what they need. Because it feels like an efficient action, but it loses sight of the fact that every buyer is unique, and nobody wants to be prescribed to before the problem's been properly diagnosed by the other individual. But that's something that salespeople who have been doing it for a while just start to do. I've always sort of marveled at that phenomenon in sales organizations. I don't know if you have an opinion on that, or if it even relates to what we're talking about here.
It's 100% real. And you're right. When you're new and you come into an organization, if they have an onboarding program where they give you training in a process, they go, here is the process. And you don't know any better. So you follow the process. And then you begin to follow the process and you go, oh, listen, I'm killing it. Well, I don't have to do this part. And what you see is exactly your point. You start to see that their productivity goes down. We ran an SKO years ago with a very tenured sales organization. I used the theme from one of the M. Night Shyamalan movies. I see dead people. right? And it was this idea of right, there's the red everywhere that you are is foretelling, right?
Yeah.
And so I was, I had all these tenured individuals, and what I had asked the company to do is I said, I want you to print out a list of all of the business that they won and lost last year. And I opened up the conversation with, how much of a different conversation would this be if 2 to 3% of what's on the loss side was on the win side, right? And what could you have done to change that? And it was about going back to basics. And when we started, they were like, oh, these guys are really tenured. They're not going to want to hear that. And we talked about really basic stuff. And the feedback on the session overall was, that was such a great session because it reminded me of all the things I used to do that got me to be successful that I have stopped doing because I got too smart, and it impacted my results. Now I was still getting results because I've been doing this long enough that I've got a very wide funnel at this point. I have enough people that I can talk to about enough things, but there were absolutely pieces of business that I could have changed the results on had I focused on the early stages of the process. Ask the question. One of the pieces of business was actually the seller said, we were told right at the beginning that we wouldn't win. No matter what, you're not going to win this piece of business. If you still decide that you want to engage, you can, but we're not going to win. And the company decided, well, that's a big piece of business. There's no way that we no bid that. And so they spent 6 or 7 months and a lot of energy. Well, what could they have been doing with that time? They could have focused on things that they could have won with companies that they could have won business with. We get a little bit too smart for our own good. I can see that in my own sales career, where I was like, well, I don't need to do this part of the process. Every part of that process is important, and asking enough questions to find the compelling event and then really connecting it. I think one of the pieces, when we talk about, this idea of cringe is when you move through that process, right? We ask enough questions to discover, well, what is it that they're trying to do? And then we sort of bypass this idea of, well, what's the implication if they can't do it? That's such an important conversation because that creates the sense of urgency. So if you're a seller out there and you see, I've got a lot of business that gets to the end of my pipeline and then it just dies, you're not creating a need to have by asking questions that connect it to the implication for not being able to do it.
Yeah. And it's entirely possible that if you did ask that question, the prospect turns to you and says, well, I don't know, it's really, the implication's not that significant. And you're going to regret not having asked it because in effect, you will have wasted time.
Yeah. Which means you didn't find a reason compelling enough for them to do anything different. And you've now wasted all of that time. And maybe the question, I'm more interested in the things that don't get asked right now than the things that do get asked, because had you asked those questions up front, hey, is this a compelling enough initiative in your company that you're willing to make an investment to change it?
Yeah.
If the answer is no at that point, every moment you spend afterwards is not weighted in your favor.
Yeah, agreed. Unless you can go find somebody else in that organization for whom it might be a problem. But that's a separate conversation.
But that's another question that's not asked, right? Well, who in the organization does this matter to?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because, none of the questions that we're throwing back and forth to one another are particularly complicated questions. I'd say they're all pretty basic, actually, but for reasons I think that you've suggested already, they just don't get asked. All right, William, it's been such a pleasure having you on the Cringe today. As is our tradition, I'd like to send you out with an opportunity to give listeners your hot take, a point that you'd like to make on any topic as we wrap up the show.
I hear salespeople that are uncomfortable asking a question because they feel like somebody's going to be insulted by that question or hang up on them or tell them it's a dumb question. And in all my life selling, I have never had somebody tell me, well, that was a stupid question. Why'd you ask that? It's only led to a sharing of more information when you ask the question that needs to be asked. And if it's a difficult question and the person that you're speaking to is genuinely interested in solving the problem, the harder questions are the ones that they want to answer, because that's what's preventing them from having success. So I think it was Wayne Gretzky that said, I miss 100% of the shots I never take. And as a salesperson, you're not going to get answers to 100% of the questions that you don't ask, because people don't just volunteer the difficult things to find out about. Ask the question. Be curious like a child.
What a great note to finish the episode on, William. Thank you. So my guest has been William Baer, Chief Operating Officer of Baker Communications. William, it's been such a pleasure having you on The Cringe. I hope you come back and talk to us again soon.
I'd love to. Invite me back anytime. It was my pleasure.
If you've enjoyed listening, follow me, Adam Clay, on LinkedIn. I'm regularly sharing insight and tips on the art of sales and the sales conversation. This podcast is produced and presented by Rainmakers, where we believe the sales conversation is everything. Check us out online at rnmkrs.com.